rugged, aggressive, and off-road capable. That's how Mazda is describing the 2022 Mazda CX-50. And with recent patent releases, there's many sketches coming together on what this vehicle actually looks like. And although I'm not an artist, I think if we go back to the spy shots from earlier in the year and look at some of these patents and some of these sketches, we can find out exactly how much larger the CX-50 will be than the CX-5. Stay tuned.
More car vids. More car vids.
As Mazda released those patents a few days ago, there's a lot of attention coming to the CX-50 because it actually confirmed what it's going to look like. And of course, it does look like the spy shots. That was the actual vehicle that we will have coming out of Alabama. Of course, the official confirmation is not going to come for about another month, but those patents stirred up some artistic abilities through some other third-party websites, such as CarBuzz, as they have think they figured out what the CX-50 will look like, or at least a pretty accurate concept. So as you look at this, it was the same picture as that was on the thumbnail of this video, but really, in my opinion, what they've done is taken the CX-5 and some of the CX-50 attributes and just meshed them together. So you can see this is the 22 CX-5 headlights, the signature wing, and then of course some other components or characteristics of the lower bumper portion from the CX-50 or the spy shots, the patent, and the MX-30, some of those, the lower center portion, and then the two cladding areas on the sides are seen on the CX-9, but not the CX-5. So they have added a little bit of both. Now, also, as you look at this front shot, they kind of went with their own wheel there, which is fine. But I'm not sure if that'll be the wheel that we'll see or something like it. It's kind of bland. It looks like it's a 20-inch wheel, or maybe they oversized them a little bit. So not using just something from the 22 CX-5 releases. Also, you can see that the fender flares are a little bit thinner than what I think they'll actually be, but they did flatten them out on top, as I expect from these spy shots and the released patents that it will be flattened out. To speak of that for just a minute, we are accustomed to this round semicircle fender flare, and now they're getting flattened out, and I'll give you my idea of that in just a moment when we get to the spy shot footage. Looking at this vehicle, I think it's fairly accurate, except when you look on this other shot here, which is the back, the rear quarter is not as broad or as wide as it is on those spy shots and on the released patents. And I know that this is, just a rendering that lights, shadows, colors can have effect. So I don't know if they intended it to be wider and it just didn't come out that way, but I think they're going to have a pretty bulky, wide rear fenders. However, the rear hatch is spot on. The styling cues that were released on those patents is right in line with what I expect. And all in all, a good job. So a lot better than I can do. But let's jump into these actual spy shots and see how they compare. If you'll remember, this one here of this front half of the vehicle, that is kind of the similar pizza style wheel that we've seen on the release of the 22 CX-5. And you can also see here how that fender flare is going to be a little bit wider than what CarBuzz was showing. And again, thanks to the Fastlane Car. I know we've used these in several videos. Thanks to the Fastlane Car for having such a reach that someone saw this on a California highway, took a few pictures and sent it to the guys and gals there at the Fastlane Car, tflcar.com. So glad to have these pictures. We've talked about them a lot. And in fact, this is the CX-50. But back to the wheels. If you measure those, we know that this is a 20-inch wheel. The other picture that I'll show you in just a minute, you can zoom in on the tire size and see a 20 there. So we know this is a 20-inch wheel. It is going to require a little bit more room, a little bit more wheel gap than a 19. However, I was measuring or comparing the CX-30 and several other vehicles, actually, the CX-30 and the CX-5, the CX-3 to the CX-30, and the CX-5 to the CX-8, just to see how Mazda's done things in the past so we can apply that to the future. And when you actually measure that flare from end to end, it comes up on the CX-30 at 39 inches. And then using the scale of the 20-inch wheel, it's actually 42 inches, which makes sense that you would need that extra space or width there for a larger wheel and tire, perhaps, if we're talking about aggressive, rugged off-road. So that makes sense. What a lot of you don't like is how that flare is squatted down flat. However, I think this is the best and most aggressive design that Mazda can offer. And I hate to bring up our new partner here, but Toyota, if you look at this picture of the RAV4, its current generation, it has that same design. And where did they get it from? The 4Runner, that this generation of 4Runner has been running since 2009 when it released as a 2010 model. So definitely doing something right, because although it doesn't sell at the volume that we want the CX-50 to sell at, it still is selling with little changes. And it's still a highly desired off-road vehicle. And that's what they're wanting in the CX-50, is to appeal to more off-road with their new all-wheel drive strategy. I did want to go over sort of the method to my madness here. So we know that the CX-5, as it is today, is actually the CX-8, same frame. CX-8's kind of stretched that frame a little bit, but a narrow or same width body vehicle in Japan, Australia, a few other places in Asian countries, and of course for regulations. So it couldn't be a wider CX-9, but it could be a longer CX-5, and that's what they've done. So when you look at the current wheelbase, you know, center of the wheel to center of the wheel, of front and rear of the CX-5, it's 106.2 inches. They stretched the wheelbase of that CX-8 to 115 inches. So it added a little over 9 inches to that wheelbase, making it a little bit longer. And of course, if you're unfamiliar with the CX-8, it is a third row seat vehicle. So they've got extra room for more passengers there. Also comparing the overall length of the CX-5 and the CX-8, the overall length is almost 13 inches longer overall, the CX-8 over the CX-5. So again, this is the same platform that they've been able to modify with sheet metal and other things to make it more like a wagon, but longer. So as we know, the new CX-50 will be using that small product architecture of the CX-30. So we can learn from the CX-5 and the CX-8's relationship compared to the CX-30 and the CX-50. Now, as I mentioned, the CX-5 and the CX-8 are the same width. However, I believe that this new CX-50 is taking that platform and pushing those 20-inch wheels farther out than they were, and they're pretty wide on the Mazda 3 and the CX-30, but I think a little bit larger tire size or wheel size allows you to push those out ever so slightly more, and that's why you have those big humps or bumps on the rear quarter, because they're making room for those wheels and tires out wide to have more cargo in between, which is definitely a big plus to me for this CX-50. So let's look at some of those actual measurements of the CX-30. Now, comparing these measurements, the 42 inches of the fender flare to the 39, and looking at some of these other measurements of the CX-5 to the CX-8 relationally, and some of the other things that I measured and looked at, I believe it's about between 107 or between a 7 and 8% increase on these measurements from the CX-5 to CX-8 and from the CX-30 to the CX-50. So if we apply those metrics, the current wheelbase of the CX-30 is 104.4. The new CX-50 will be a little over 112. So we're pushing those wheels out about 8 inches, a little bit under 8 inches. And then as far as your track or your width, because they're pushing those out as well, I think you're going to add almost 5 inches. So from 61.6 to 66.2, you're going to add about 5 inches of width, which will be great for a bigger vehicle. Overall length, you're going to go on the CX-30 of 173 inches to about 186. So that's a little bit over a foot in length, which I think is fantastic. Again, wanting that little bit larger vehicle. Width, just like the track there going up, the width of the tires going up about 5 inches. I think the overall width will be about 5 inches higher as well. And the height, this is where the rubber meets the road here to me. The current CX-30 is 62.2 inches high. The CX-5 is 65.3. And I believe this CX-50 will be 66.8. So almost 67 inches. So almost, well, about 1.5 inches higher, taller than the CX-5. So all these measurements are getting bigger than the CX-5. The only thing, based on looking at these spy shots, that I could tell by extrapolating the different scales that I could find based on a 20-inch wheel, the only thing that doesn't seem to change is the overall ground clearance, which kind of makes sense because the CX-5 ground clearance is 7.5 inches. The CX-30 is 8 inches, but I believe the CX-50 from these measurements is going to be about 7.5 as well. And probably what they've done is they've stretched it this way to give more passenger volume in the dropping it down about 5 inches and raising that height from the CX-30, whereas the CX-30 is kind of just like this up. I think this is stretching it open for more passenger volume, more headroom, etc., etc. So I think these are all good things. Even though we're talking off-road, 7.5 and 8 inches is really not much difference in ground clearance. Okay, let's flip to the back shot here. This is the spy shots, as we remember, and this is that hump I was talking about, how it's really pushed out that wheel. And all in all, the same kind of layout applies to the CX-5 and the CX-50, although there's going to be some differences we've talked about last week or earlier this week with the rear window and things like that. When you look at the profile of the CX-50 compared to the CX-5, it's going to be very similar. It's going to be kind of a sport coupe look, but those fender flares are going to stand out because they're going to be flattened up top to be a little bit more aggressive, and I think it's going to look fantastic. And I think that it is going to be, when we're able to put them side by side, it's going to be just a little bit longer wheelbase, a little bit taller, and a little bit wider. So those are all good things because, as we expect from the CX-3 to the CX-30, it was bigger. So from the CX-5 to the CX-50, bigger. Now the last picture that I want to look at as far as the spy shots is the front nose. So CX-5, CX-8, same width. I think these are going to be wider, and this is how I believe it's going to happen. The emblem, the Mazda emblem with the radar behind it, as we assume it will still have, is again coming from the CX-30 and the Mazda 3. So we see the big, bold emblem on the CX-5, which is about 8.25, 8.5 diameter. It's actually smaller to 6 inches, 6.25 inches on the CX-30 and the Mazda 3. And it looks like that's the same one that's going to be used on the CX-50, as we expect to see a lot of the same materials used on both CX-30 and CX-50, aside from exterior styling. So when you measure or apply some of the same measurements here of that 6.25 emblem compared to the width of the grille, the CX, let me find the exact notes here. I've got all types of sketches and drawings. The CX-30 is 36 inches from where the headlights, that little space where we talked about before for air management, where the vortex is created, the little break there between the signature wing and where the headlights start on that grille is 36 inches. All right, the CX-50, when you extrapolate from that emblem, is 39 inches. So again, I think that the wider grille would be on a wider vehicle. So we are getting a little bit wider. Also, the overall width, as we talking about 5 to 6 inches wide, I think that you could easily see that each of those rear quarter flares, or the bumps in the rear quarter, are about 2 to 3 inches apiece as they come out. So that speaks to pushing those wheels farther out on that vehicle. So I think that the spy shots are the CX-50. I think that it is Mazda's doing their magic with this small group architecture and making it just a little bit bigger all the way around to accomplish more cargo space, more passenger room, maybe overall design, maybe a little bit more rugged and off-road capable because of the wider stance track and the longer wheelbase, a little bit more of a smoother ride. And we know that this powertrain is going to be similar to what we have now on the CX-5 and the CX-30, 2.5 liter Skyactiv G and 2.5 T, probably with some different models, just like we see on the CX-5 and CX-30 now. So not much changes there, although I would really love to see an 8-speed automatic. I don't think it's going to happen on this one, but maybe some of that large architecture coming next year. We want a little bit bigger all the way around from CX-5 to CX-50, and I think that we can expect these measurements, as I'm finding that page again, to be about 8 inches longer in wheelbase, to be about 5 inches wider in the track of the wheels, also to be about 12 inches overall length longer, and to be about 5 inches wider of a vehicle. So I think this is very exciting, and I really can't wait another month to find out exactly what's going on with this baby. But I know it's going to be beautiful, and somewhere around November 15th, I think, is when this is all going down. I think November 15th is a Monday. So just like they released the announcement on Tuesday, maybe it'll be the 16th of November. But as soon as I have more information, I'll clue you in. And I'm always going to be here on the boulevard making notes, printing stuff, trying to figure out everything I can about this new crossover, specifically the CX-50, made in Alabama at Mazda, Alabama. And I hope to see you on the road driving your Mazda and sharing your Mazda passion. But I'm here, you're there, and I'll see you on the next one.